All right. We're back.
We're back again.
Back again.
80th time. We just need to like create our own podcast, the two of us, at some point, because we might as well. I mean, there's not enough podcasts out there. There's only a few. So why not create another one? Right?
Agreed.
Yeah.
I mean, once I feel like I'm still getting my podcast like down and you're like just killing yours. So
I appreciate that. But I mean, I feel like we're all just kind of, figuring it out and trying to keep going from week to week. But yeah, I mean, I think,
sorry. No, I was just saying, how long again have you been podcasting for?
I started hosting Paleo Magazine, I want to say 2017. So like I've been doing it 17, 18, 19, 20, like 4 years, and probably really only the last 6 months by myself. But yeah, I've learned a lot, but I think one of the reasons why there's so many podcasts out there and why they keep going, even if they maybe aren't super successful, aren't making a ton of money, is because there's so much value in the person doing it, right? Like, there's a low barrier to entry for a lot of people, but also it's like, if I can just keep this going because I get access to so many smart people and I get to have these amazing conversations. And then if it just helps a couple people, that's great. I mean, at a certain point, it's a lot of work. And if you're not getting any return, that's a problem. But I think that people just keep doing it because it is such a cool medium and it's such a valuable resource for not only the people who get to listen, but the people who get to do it too. So
yeah, I agree.
That's why we're still here.
Yeah, it's a lot of work, but it's like so rewarding in the sense that, and just recently over the last few weeks, I've had a lot of people reach out saying that like they listen to the podcast like on, their walks and it's like their go-to. And I'm like, that's exactly like, I love that. And they're like just saying that they're learning so much, which is obviously what we want. Right. So
yeah,
that's cool.
Pretty awesome. So we're talking about everyone's favorite topic today, the topic that everyone just loves.
Yeah.
Cardio.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like it's one of those things that just like, it's like we have to like kind of understand it to really be able to implement it properly. And when I say properly, I mean like not overdo it or underdo it. I feel like there's just such like a happy medium. I mean, and this is with anything, right? Like dieting. In the last episode, we talked about building muscle, but it's like people can go, and I always talk about this, like the two ends of the extreme where you're like not doing anything and then you're just doing like way too much. And I think just with anything else, like finding a balance for you and your overall really stress load, I think is one of the biggest things that a lot of people don't, think about when they think about implementing cardio or how much cardio they're doing. It's like, that is a stress on your body if you're doing tons of it. And if you're doing tons of, HIIT training and stuff like that, which we're going to get into. But yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I think also it's a bad word because most people don't like it, but it also, we talk a lot about semantics, I think on this podcast and how people hear a word and they automatically turn off because they don't maybe understand it, or we might use trendy words that really, once you kind of get past the trendy part of it, are actually really offering a lot of value. And I mean, we can look at cardio as being the types of movement we do during the day that we enjoy. So going for long walks, going for hikes, if you're a skier in the winter, if you like to do adventure races, like these things are all cardio too. It's just, it sounds a lot more fun when you say skiing than cardio because you're just doing an activity that you like. And so again, I think it's understanding what you're actually talking about when you talk about it. Like, are we talking about cardio for cardio's sake? Are we talking about it for fat loss? Are we talking about it for metabolic conditioning and heart health and optimizing your overall functional health? Are we talking about it specific to a sport that may need more or less? So yeah, I mean, again, it's a bad word. It's the C word, but it doesn't have to be.
Yeah, for sure. So do you want to jump into the questions?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. We got 5 questions here. So I'll just read off the first one. So the first one is, this is one that I got. I listened to your Cardio Confusion podcast and wondering, once you meet your goals, what do you suggest next? You really can't keep increasing because, as you said, you're going to burn out. Do you take a break? Do you switch goals? How long of a break before you go type A gung ho again?
That's a big question, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
and that, I think the question applies not just to cardio specifically, but to any goal, and especially any physical goal. It's like, how do you know when you've reached your goal? How do you maintain that? How do you move on to the next thing? How do you cycle? Like there's, that's like a deeply complex, I think, an individual question, but I mean, we can try to work through it.
Yeah. I mean, it says, what do you suggest next once you meet your goal? So I would say, like, if you do meet your goal, then the next step would be, I mean, depending on you, but set a new goal, right? And depending on like what, and I think with this question, I probably should ask for a little bit more background context in the terms of what exactly the goal was. Cause if the goal is, implementing cardio for, fat loss, is the goal implementing cardio for, you're trying to do a triathlon or, a marathon or something like that. Like we talk about the different, applications. And that's what I was talking about in the Cardio Confusion podcast. When she asked this, I was talking about how like especially with myself, like having a type A personality and wanting to just go all the time. And, not realizing that there is a point where you, like we said, you have kind of this stress bucket and it can overflow if you're not careful, and adding more and more kind of cardio and stress, especially in the form of HIIT training, cannot be super advantageous if you are already stressed in all other areas of your life. But when it comes to, this, she said, do you switch goals? I would say, yeah. I mean, it just depends like what you're trying to get out of it. Like, are you training for something? For me specifically, like I love having a specific goal for certain things. But I don't think, everybody's different. You don't necessarily have to have a goal for your body composition or for, anything, right? You don't have to, but personally for me, if I don't have a specific goal, then it's hard for me to like, get up every day. And for example, if I'm implementing cardio, like go, walk on the incline treadmill for 20 minutes to get my cardio. And if my goal is, if I'm in like a deep fat loss phase or something like that, like if I didn't have a goal of, a photo shoot or something like that, then I would be like, why the hell am I doing this? Like, what does it matter? Right. So yeah.
I think there's also a conversation there around like goal setting and achieving. And there's sort of like a story arc there, like there is with any story, where it's like the first part is the getting to the goal. The second part is this maintenance phase, because presumably whatever it is might last more than 5 minutes. So how do you stay there if your goal is like fat loss or a certain strength level or something? Mm-hmm. And then there's also a side on the end, which is either coming out of a super restrictive hardcore training period, or how to transition into a next goal. So there's sort of 3 distinct parts there for most people. And I think part of one of those questions is like, how do you, once you've achieved a goal, how do you kind of stay there? Like, how does your training change from something that may be more regimented and strict to get to the goal? And then once you're there, how do you stay there? And so if we're talking about something like fat loss, there are kind of distinct stages there, right? Because maintenance activity and eating is probably going to look different than what you had to eat and do to get there, right? And I think generally speaking, as long as the goal that you reached isn't incredibly unsustainable and unnatural for you, maintenance tends to be a little bit easier than the work to get it, right? So I think that that's something that, again, working with a coach is very important, and understanding your baseline, your like metabolic rate and your baseline calories that you need and how that's going to change as you lose fat and build muscle and things like that. But coming up with a sort of sustainable maintenance plan is just as important, if not more so, than the plan to get you there, right? Because like you said, anybody can kind of follow something super strict and super intense for a short period of time because they see this amazing light at the end of the tunnel. But then when you get there and you're like lost, you're like, well, shit, now what do I do? Because I'm not going to keep crazy dieting or whatever. I'm here now. So now what do I do? And that's a really significant thing that I think a lot of people don't always pay as much attention to, because the focus is so much on getting there and then not so much on how do you stay or how do you live there,
Yeah. Yeah. And then also realizing like what fits with your lifestyle. Like if you, and this is why I don't, and if we're talking about fat loss here, if I don't like, incorporating cardio until it's absolutely necessary, like it's kind of the last thing, especially, if you're in a fat loss phase or whatever it may be, like that's the last thing, because your body adapts to cardio, right? I talked about this all in that podcast, Cardio Confusion, which I'll link in the show notes or, but it's like, once you get there, right, and say you're doing, tons and tons of cardio to reach your goal, you don't want to, like, if you're maintaining, you have to pull that back, right? Unless you are someone who enjoys, doing tons and tons of cardio. But that's kind of like the last piece of the puzzle, because if you just start with that, right, if you kind of get into your deficit just using cardio alone, then you're going to adapt to that. You're going to have to just do more and more and more every single week to continue seeing the result that you want. And then once you get to that result, it's like, oh crap, I just have to keep doing this cardio to maintain. Whereas if you, look at all the other factors, and we talked all about this in the last one about building muscle, and that's super important. So anyway, we have a question that's related to that, so I won't get too far into that now, but.
You talk a lot about different like cutting phases and like sort of bulking phases that you've been through, but I don't know if we've really talked too much about any maintenance work that you've done, because it seems like you said, you love to have goals. And so you're always either like, all right, I'm trying to gain more muscle, or I'm trying to lean out for something or whatever. Yeah. But have you gone through any like sort of periods where you are focusing solely on maintaining what you have, and how has that looked for you?
Yeah. So that's actually what I went through, I guess, last year. So I had my initial kind of transformation through the summer of 2019. And I had my first photo shoot in August 2019. And then after the photo shoot, really the goal, it was getting into the fall, getting into the holiday season. So my goal was really just like, I want to maintain where I'm at. Obviously after the photo shoot, I didn't maintain the exact leanness that I was at with the photo shoot. And that's what a lot of people have to realize too. You talk about this all the time, like getting super, super lean and, being something that you can sustain is, especially for a photo shoot or depends how lean you get. But for me, like I wasn't super, super lean. Like it wasn't like stage ready lean or anything like that, but it was pretty lean. So I did gain a little bit back, did a reverse. And then my goal through the rest of 2019 and then into 2020 was just to maintain for about, I guess, from August to March. So that was like, how many months is that? 6 months? 5 months? August, like September, October, November, December, January, February, March. Oh, 8 months. 8 months. Yeah. Wow. Can't do math. So I maintained for about 8 months, pretty much where I was at. And then I had the goal of the cruise to get a little bit leaner. And during that maintenance, during that maintenance phase, my goal was to just, maintain and work on kind of building a little bit more muscle. And I did, my lifts did increase in the gym, but not to the degree that they are right now when I'm in a building phase. So anyway, I went through that period to maintain, and then I, cut again for the cruise that didn't happen. And looking back on it, I probably wasn't ready to go into another fat loss phase. Like I probably should have just maintained and then gone into a building phase from there, but I had set another goal. But I think that's all just part of the process, part of learning, like, along the way. And that's why I personally like having these different, stages and going through them myself, because when I take clients through them, it's a lot easier for me to relate to what they're going through. And I just like that experimentation and like seeing what I can do. So
I like that. I think to kind of close the loop on this question, I think a like general answer that does make sense is, when it's time to change a goal or adjust a plan when you have plateaued, when you are no longer interested, or when you are seeing negative results. So like another example that I've used multiple times is when I have potential clients come to me who say, I'm obsessed with keto. I love keto. I did hardcore keto for 2 years and I lost 50 pounds. And now my hormones are messed up and I've plateaued and I'm kind of gaining weight back again and I'm miserable and I'm unhappy. What do I do? It's like, probably not keto anymore. Probably, right? Like, yeah. So you'll start to, and part of knowing when that time comes is tracking, paying close attention to what you're doing. And that doesn't mean obsessively tracking everything you do, but it means if you're doing physical stuff in the gym and you're tracking it and paying attention, are you noticing plateaus? Are you noticing that you're not interested or passionate about the work that you're doing anymore? Do you notice that maybe your strength numbers are going down? Are your hormones out of whack? If you've been eating a certain way and it's worked, and then after 3 weeks, maybe 3 weeks have gone by where it isn't working anymore and your energy's bad and your digestion's bad and maybe your mood's messed up, and like you start to notice these things, those are signs that something needs to change. And our bodies know that we like variety. We like to switch things up. We like to cycle things on and off. It likes variety. It likes to be sort of surprised into making changes and adjustments. So there's always that fine line between, you need to give a new diet or a new workout its time. You need to adhere to it. You need to be dedicated to it for a certain amount of time, because your body doesn't change overnight. But you also probably don't want to pick one workout methodology and one diet and stick to it for the next 25 years. Like you're going to want to make changes. And so the biggest thing I'd say is just work on paying attention to your body and its signals, and it will tell you. So again, with bodybuilding, if you're bored as hell with it, maybe try something else. Or if you're, never haven't eaten a carb in 3 years and you're feeling kind of low energy, I don't know, maybe you should try something different. Right. And then of course, something you've talked about before too, is investing in a coach and investing in somebody who's knowledgeable, that can have a little bit of an outside objective look, who can be kind of tracking the stuff for you too, and saying like, okay, well, this has worked and now it's not working anymore as well. So let's pivot and adjust and make some changes. But there is no sort of like definitive, like we can't say like change your diet after 12 weeks or do it, it's completely individual. So it really matters more about how you feel, how your body is responding to it. And like I've said many times before, taking away the emotional connection to what you're doing, so that it's not like you've done keto and now it's not working, but you can't give it up because it means you failed or it means you didn't do it right. That's not accurate. Your goals change, your needs change, and you need to be willing to kind of change with it. So just kind of be a bit more fluid and be okay with things changing, because that's what life is.
Yeah, I agree. And one more thing, because I just thought about this in terms of like goal setting, like understanding that, when you're setting a goal, you really need to think about why you're setting that goal. And you kind of post about this. I think you posted about this like a few days ago about, getting abs, right? And setting the goal to get abs. And then once you have the abs, it's like, yeah, people look and they're like, oh yeah, like that's cool. And then they just go about their lives. Right. And it doesn't really affect them. Right. So it's like, okay, why do you have this goal, and what does it mean to you versus how you perceive other people looking at you when you've reached this goal. So that's another thing that I think, and I've done this many times myself too, right? Like we all care what other people think to some degree, right? And we all want to have that kind of like, shining moment. But I think the underlying thing that you really need to think about is why, and really honing in on that why, but also understanding that, once you reach that goal, like, think about what happens next versus reaching that and then be like, okay, now what do I do? Like have a plan for after you hit that goal, I guess.
Absolutely. Yep. Yep. Completely agree. Do you want me to ask the next question?
Yeah.
Cardio questions. Okay. I do a brisk walk every morning, 30 to 45 minutes, with the heart rate range between 115 and 135, which is around 5,000 steps. Would that be considered doing cardio or just getting your steps in? So again, we're talking semantics here. This person says they listen to your Cardio Confusion podcast, but still not sure what this is achieving, I suppose.
Yeah. So I would say when I look at cardio, when I think of cardio myself, I'm like, okay, cardio in my eyes is implementing something specifically for a goal. Like, so, and when I say like cardio, usually I look at cardio as like low intensity training or moderate intensity training. And then I define like high intensity training as more conditioning. That's just kind of like how I personally look at the two terms. But when we're talking about like walks, so she said a brisk walk between 115 and 135 beats per minute. So I would say that's pretty, that's definitely lower intensity. And so in this, I believe in the Cardio Confusion podcast, or the heart rate training podcast, which was the follow-up to the Cardio Confusion podcast, I talked about heart rate zones and stuff like that, and how you can use those to gauge, your, how much effort you're bringing to the table and where your heart rate is at. So I talked all about that in the heart rate zone episode. So I'll link that one in the show notes. But I would say 115 to 135 is definitely probably around like 60 to 70%, maybe 50%, like closer to that 115. I don't know this person's age, but I'm assuming, 115 to 135 is around that. So that's a brisk walk. I mean, I think that's pretty sustainable. you said you get around 5K steps. I personally walk every single day. Like I try to hit 10K steps, you know, when I'm walking to and from the gym. I would say if you're like incorporating running into that and all of that, like that would be just, you know, managing the fatigue side of things and understanding like, again, where you're at with your stress level. But in terms of, you know, a brisk walk every day, I think that's personally like, that's very, very healthy. Right. And that's really good for getting you, you know, building up that aerobic base that we talk about and kind of, you know, although you are in that 115 range, it's still pretty parasympathetic versus being higher than that, which be more in that sympathetic stressed out stage. So I think that's, I mean, I personally would say that that's great. And if you can maintain that and it makes you feel good and you enjoy walking, I would say that's probably, you know, not necessarily considered like technically cardio. Like, that makes sense.
I mean, I also feel like, why can't it be both? That can be cardio and getting your steps in, like depending on the person. I mean, and again, like you said, depending on your goals, like if you need to lose 40 pounds of fat, like maybe a sort of brisk, you know, 5K walk isn't going to be enough. Maybe that's a great start. And that's part of what you need to do. Maybe you need to incorporate some other things like HIIT or longer walks or incline walks or whatever. But I think what you're doing is absolutely, like you said, Rachel, very healthy, excellent for your mental health, for your breathing, for general functional wellness that every single person should be doing is going for walks. Doing it first thing in the morning is fantastic. Doing it before you eat is fantastic because you're getting some of this fasted exercise in that's going to burn some fat. But these things can all be the same. Like it doesn't have to be like your mental health walks, getting your steps in don't have to be separate from your cardio. When I was prepping for bodybuilding shows and I had to do cardio because again, I'm not taking drugs and I'm a woman. So that fat's not going anywhere unless I try very hard. So in addition to my weightlifting and eating very strictly and also a couple times a week, like intense HIIT workouts, I was doing steady state cardio in the morning, but it wasn't 140 beats a minute, kind of gasping, holding on to a stair climber. It was brisk walks. That's what it was. Like what this person is describing. Sometimes I did it on a treadmill on an incline. Sometimes I did it outside. Sometimes I was hiking and it was a little bit more challenging than others, but I wasn't doing like jogging where you're kind of just tired enough, but you're not actually working that hard and you're kind of miserable and it's not sustainable. Like I was doing just chill, brisk walks. My heart rate's up a little bit, but I could do it forever. I was listening to a podcast. I could talk, you know? And I think that was great. That was good for my hormones. It was good for, you know, I could listen to my podcasts and start the day well. And I was doing it fasted. So yeah, again, depends on your goals, but I think going for a nice brisk walk first thing in the morning is something everybody should be aspiring to if you can.
Yeah, I agree. And I kind of, going back to what I said, I would consider this technically cardio. So I'm going back on what I said, but when she said, you know, would that be considered doing cardio or getting your steps in? It, like you said, it depends on the goal. So if you're doing that, you do that every day and that's part of your normal day, but you're looking to incorporate more cardio on top of that, I would say that, like depending on what your goal is. But I mean, I'm thinking back to this again, that like 115 to 135, that is definitely low intensity cardio. So I would consider that, but again, just depends what your goal is. If you have a specific goal that, you know, if you've been doing this brisk walk for months on end and nothing's changing and you have like your nutrition dialed in, you have everything dialed in and you're looking to reach a specific goal, then probably have to implement something else on top of that, in that regard. So sorry if I made that confusing.
No, that's okay.
I have puppy brain right now. So
hopefully we get a cameo appearance by Lilo at some point.
I'm like a little bit sleep deprived, so my brain is like kind of working on 50%. You know how they say like baby brain? I think puppy brain is definitely a thing, which just means like you're sleep deprived and you wake up every 2 hours with a puppy who's whining.
What do you call the brain of someone who doesn't have a puppy or a baby but still can't sleep? What do you call that brain?
Oh man, I don't know.
Around. Okay. All right. Let me see the next question. This is one I'd like you to start with.
Okay.
What is the best cardio while following a keto diet? Should you do HIIT for more fat burn or low intensity as it is a more ketogenic fueled activity?
Great question. So right off the bat, I would say that we do know that, HIIT training and high intensity training does utilize more carbohydrates, right? So if you are looking to do HIIT training, again, it all depends on what your goals are, but I would say that especially if you're newer to keto, like if you're not fat adapted yet and you're just getting into keto, then I would personally say, take a break on the HIIT for a little bit, because we know we go through that adaptation phase, especially removing the carbohydrates. So personally, I would say that LISS is probably like technically considered a more ketogenic fueled activity, as you said, because it is utilizing more fat as fuel versus HIIT will utilize more carbohydrates as fuel. But then once you do get adapted and you want to incorporate more HIIT training, I think that again just comes down to your overall stress bucket. Like I think that depending on your diet, like diet is important, but I think when we're implementing HIIT, stress is the biggest thing that we need to be paying attention to. So I talked about this in the last podcast, I think that we recorded, but I was doing CrossFit for a while and a lot of HIIT training and I wasn't seeing the results I wanted, but that's because my stress bucket was just like completely overflowing. So that's one thing. But then another thing is some people say, if you're looking to get into a state of ketosis, and say you are, coming off of like a vacation or whatever it is, and you really like your goal is to get back into ketosis for a specific reason, then implementing HIIT could be a potential way to deplete your glycogen stores faster than if you were to, just go about the next few days and not incorporate any type of, high intensity training. So that's one side of things. But again, I think it just comes back to it always depends what your goal is, and what you're trying to achieve in that sense. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, I think the only thing I would really add is just that like low intensity, I think generally speaking is good for everyone across the board all the time. So it's something that we should all be getting our heads around. There are a lot of like fire breather type A people out there who are like, look, I don't have an hour to go for a walk, so I'm going to spend that hour doing a Metcon and then 500 burpees and then read a book or something. Like, I don't know. This like low intensity movement, this NEAT, this non-exercise activity, like that stuff is crucial for everyone, old people, young people, high level athletes, everybody. It's good for you. And it matters what you do outside of the half hour or hour that you dedicate to working out every day. So if you can kind of think of low intensity as more just stuff you're doing in your life, right? Like I don't consider my morning walk my workout. I consider it as important as my workout. But that's not necessarily, going to be added up as part of my, cardio, I guess. Yeah. So that's one thing is I'd say keto or not, like we should all, again, be trying to find more time in our day to have a walking chat with our friends, to take a work call while we're moving around, to listen to our podcast while we're walking outside. Like I can't stress that enough. And then the other thing on the other end of it is I would say for HIIT, whether you're keto or not, if you are incorporating HIIT is quality over quantity, right? Like you don't, just because you can or just because you feel like it, you probably shouldn't be doing HIIT every day, because for the exact reason that you said, because it's super high stress exercise that is going to eventually provide diminishing returns and maybe cause more problems than it's fixing if you're doing HIIT every day. And a lot of people who maybe think they're doing HIIT are actually doing that like worst thing where it's sort of in the middle. It's like not actually high intensity, but it's not low intensity either. So it's literally just stressing you for like no reason. You're not even getting like the real adaptations and fat burning that you'd get from HIIT. You're just kind of stressing yourself out and tiring yourself out. So with HIIT, it's really less is more. It's intensity and focus. It's doing something that you can do for really short, really intense bursts of time with the proper recovery built into it. Again, like if you think you're doing 45-minute HIIT workouts, you're not. No one's doing that. If you can do a 5 to 7 to maybe 10-minute HIIT thing that has alternating time, like rest and stuff, okay, great. But I'll do HIIT for 5 to 7 minutes. And if I'm busting my ass, that's absolutely enough. So that's the only thing I would add is just like, you know, pay attention to what you're doing. And when if you are going to do HIIT, do it, sparingly and put everything into it. And it's definitely like intensity over time.
Yeah, for sure. And then also with like keto too, we know that, you know, keto is so different for so many people, right? Keto is, you know, being in a state of ketosis. And for some people, they can, you know, incorporate a bolus of carbs right before their workout and be back in ketosis a few hours later. So I think, again, it just comes back to what you're doing and experimenting specifically for yourself, right? So you can still be following a keto diet, incorporate carbs around your workout, so a targeted keto approach, and still have the benefits of getting back into ketosis if that's the goal. And so I think it just comes down to, you know, experimenting and trying different things and seeing what makes you feel best, right? So if you feel like absolute crap after you do a HIIT workout and you've been, you know, you're pretty low carb and keto, then that's probably a sign that it's probably not a good idea to continue doing that. Your body will tell you how it feels. And so if you can pay attention as much as possible to those signals, especially the recovery signals, I think that's super important. And yeah, so
cool.
That's all I gotta say. Sweet. For that. Awesome. Okay. Do you want me to ask the next one?
Yeah.
I just lost track of, I did a Q&A yesterday with my Keto for Women program. Like I do a live every Tuesday evening. And I was like, again, it was puppy brain. And I like, my vision was like going and I totally skipped over like 2 questions. And someone asked me after live, she's like, is my question going to be answered next week? Because it wasn't answered this week. And I was like, oh, crap.
Stop blaming Lilo. Gee.
I know. I need to
So
stop.
cute. No, I can only imagine. Like, I feel like they are actually like as high maintenance as babies the first couple weeks, probably, maybe not quite, but close.
But that's the thing I was thinking about too. It's like babies have like diapers, right? So they can, you know, they don't pee and poop everywhere. Whereas the puppy is like, she's so cute when she's just like chilling and like you're rubbing her tummy. And then she's like a terrorist the other half of the time when she's like sniffing around. And then I don't know, I can get into all that, but.
Well, at least you're not breastfeeding.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you've got that.
Oh man. Okay. All right. We have 3 more questions. Let's get back to cardio. Do I have to do cardio to lose? Oh yeah. Sorry. Again, vision is impaired. Do I have to do cardio to lose weight if I feel like I've maximized everything else and I'm still holding on to fat? And then in parentheses, she wrote maximizing diet, sleep, stress, and weightlifting. Do you want to start? Do you want me to start?
Yeah, there's a couple things to unpack there. Again, it's always so helpful. Like if we had the person in front of us that we could like grill with follow-up questions. But I mean, there is, of course, determining if you are maximizing those other things, right? Because maybe you think you are and you aren't. So that's where having a coach or somebody objective outside to watch what you're doing and weigh in would be really helpful, because maybe you think the food's ideal and it's not. Maybe your sleep actually isn't that great. Maybe you're over exercising or under eating. Like there's a ton of things there that you can play with and adjust and kind of tweak to see if you can continue moving the needle with those other elements, since like you said, cardio really should ideally be a last resort and not a tool that anyone has to weigh too heavily on. Another question could be there, and again, I have no idea who this person is, so this may not be applicable, but a lot of people, we've talked about this before, that sadly, a lot of people, and especially women, their ideal body composition is maybe 10, 15, 20 pounds different than what their body's ideal composition is. So what you wish you looked like based on looking at people on Instagram and magazines or whatever, may be different than what your actual healthy, sustainable body fat level is. So there could be an element of you are doing everything right and your body is actually at a very healthy, happy place, and you just want it to be leaner to an extent that maybe isn't sustainable. So again, you can push and you can tweak and you can make things, you know, you can lose more fat if you need to. But if it isn't a place that your body is healthy at, if it isn't a place that your body's happy at, you may encounter some issues down the road if you try to stay in a place that just isn't reasonable. So you know, it's tough because you don't want to tell anybody like, hey, just settle for a body that you're unhappy with. But maybe you are at a very healthy, happy, reasonable body fat level and your expectations are unrealistic. That's possible, you know?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of like sort of more high level existential questions you maybe need to ask yourself. But I do think that, like you said earlier, cardio and just increased movement, I think, maybe even less than the C word, increased movement is something that is going to help tweak and move the needle. And that's something that, again, like I had to do when I was doing these bodybuilding competitions where I was trying to get leaner than what my body naturally wanted to do. So I had to be extra. I had to do more than if I was just trying to be healthy. And cardio was that. And again, I wasn't like kind of busting my ass with like 20K jogs every day or anything, but I was walking a lot more than I would have otherwise. I was dedicating more time to daily movement because I was just at that point trying to burn more calories than I was eating. So, I mean, I guess a short answer is maybe if you have literally exhausted everything else and you're still holding on to body fat that you don't like, cardio is probably going to help. But it's deciding like, do you actually need to lose more fat? And did you actually do everything else you could before? Because it seems like this person is saying cardio is the last resort I don't really want to do if I don't have to. So those are the questions you want to ask yourself before you kind of move forward with that.
Yeah, I 100% agree with everything you said. And I think that also thinking of like, if you do get to that point where like, okay, I still want to get leaner and I've exhausted, like you said, all of these things, my sleep's in check, my stress is in check. Everything else is in check. My nutrition is in check in the sense of I am, paying attention to it. I have objective metrics that I'm, tracking whatever my calories, my macros, all of that, making sure all that's good. And you do still want to get leaner, then yes, you probably have to implement some type of cardio to, push that needle a little bit further, like you said, but doing it strategically is super important. So going from like 0 to 100 is probably not the best idea. When I'm personally implementing cardio for clients and for myself, we do it gradually, right? So for example, if you went from doing no cardio and you want to start including cardio into your, weekly goals, right? Or your weekly training, then for example, maybe implementing like 2 days of like low intensity cardio for like 20 to 30 minutes, see how that goes. Again, keeping everything else in check. And then maybe the next week you do 2 days of, say the first week was 2 days of 20 minutes. Second week is 2 days of 25 minutes. Maybe the third week is 2 days of 30 minutes. And then you maybe switch to 3 days of 20 minutes, right? So you're gradually increasing it rather than going from like 0 to like 5 days of cardio. So that's what I would say, just because we do know, like I said, our bodies adapt, right? Very easily to cardio. And we want to use it super strategically as that tool if it's being used for fat loss. Because, if you go, for example, run a mile this week, and the amount of calories, say you burned 100 calories running a mile this week. This is just an arbitrary number. Then you go to run that same mile next week or the week after, maybe you burn 90 calories, right? And then it continues to decrease because you become more efficient at it, right? So when we're talking about cardio for fat loss, you definitely don't want to be efficient, because the more efficient you get, the less calorie burn occurs. And so you're doing the goal that you're doing this for actually becomes less, right? Versus if you are doing cardio to train for a sport like a marathon, it's the opposite. You want to become more efficient because you want to become faster and you want to use less energy when you're doing that. So yeah, that's kind of my take on that. But I think you hit on it. Everything you said, I 100% agree.
Squash isn't that good. Sorry, I have to keep adding dissenting opinions in here.
I know.
I was actually looking at, just as a quick aside, I was looking at your some of your recipes on your website the other day, because I want to make, even though I think I kind of know how to do it, but the like electrolyte jello, like the gummies, and I think I saw a squash dessert that you have on there that I'm like, all right, this I can get into. Okay, turning squash into something sweet. Gonna try it. So I will do that and report back to you.
Yeah, for sure. Well, the kabocha squash, that's the thing. And that's one of the reasons why I love it, because I love sweet things. Yeah. And so it's literally like on my blog, it's nature's candy. Because it's like literally so good. So I
just rolled my eyes at you with respect. Nature's candy. You know what nature's candy is? Maple syrup, honey,
I thought you were going to say chocolate.
Which go well on, and yeah, that too, which go well on squash. So, okay,
Yes,
we've found a place to agree. All right. This is a good question. Because we talk so much about people who hate cardio. It's good to get the other side of it.
Yeah.
So this person's asking the question, what if I like cardio and endurance stuff like long hikes, long bikes, long runs? Do I still have to eat carbs to support this? Or can I be super low carb or carnivore and still perform well at like endurance cardio stuff? Great question.
I keep pulling my ear out. Sorry.
Okay.
Yes. Great question. So I would say it kind of just goes back to what I mentioned a few questions ago with, fueling your activity and what that activity is. I think that especially with endurance, because, if we're talking about like long runs or long hikes, I would say hikes for me, long hikes depends, because when you're doing a hike, like if you're, it depends how much you're actually like climbing in that sense, because that can be turned into, it can be, low intensity to actually pretty high intensity if you're doing a pretty extreme hike, right? Like I feel like you do you do a bunch of hiking?
I do a lot of hiking around here, and there's a park called Gatineau Park in Quebec, which is very close to where I live, and it's beautiful and huge, and there's a ton of trails, and most of them are quite hilly.
Yeah.
So yeah, it gets intense real quick, but it can be both, right? Because you can do a 10K hike, 6 miles, and a couple miles of it are like nice, beautiful, easy walking through the woods, and all of a sudden you're like on a 90% incline on walks and stuff, and it's like pretty intense. So you might be kind of hitting different workouts in the middle of one,
Yeah. So I would say like she said, do I have to eat carbs to support this? Again, it just comes back to really, first of all, how adapted you are to a lower carb diet. And then also, again, what your activity is like. So if it's, super, if it's just a light jog or a light run or whatever, or light bike ride or whatever it is, and you feel like you have good energy and you're feeling good and you're not having any carbs, then go with it, right? If you feel like you can't get through that bike ride and you're just completely drained, again, this is, in the context of you're already adapted, right? We want to talk about that. We want to make sure that we mention that, because in the first few weeks of keto adaptation, you're definitely going to have, a little bit lower energy, especially during workouts. That's just kind of how that transition works. One tip with that would be just making sure your electrolytes are on point. Cause that's one thing that I see a lot. It's like, I have this crappy energy during my training. And once we start incorporate, they're like, I think I need to, add carbs back in. But then when we, maybe incorporate more electrolytes into the mix, it starts to, you're like, oh, I have more energy now. And it's not necessarily the carbohydrates, but it's your electrolyte imbalance. So that's just one side note. But yeah, I think this kind of just goes back to what I mentioned before with the other question. Like it just really just depends how you're feeling during that, and paying attention to how you're feeling during that activity. And then also afterwards, how you're recovering. And then just experimenting, right? And trying things out and seeing, what, maybe if you did implement a little bit of carbs, before your long hike, or you brought, something with you that allowed you to, get a little bit more energy during that hike, just try different things out. I think that's the biggest takeaway is like, everybody's so different. And if you don't try something, you're never going to know like what's helping or what's not. So,
yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I think probably like, again, considering if you're fat adapted and you're healthy, I think that like a general answer is no, you don't have to. We don't have to eat carbs. We've talked about this. It's very helpful and useful in a lot of cases. And why wouldn't you, when it is an easier, more effective way to fuel yourself, I think is another conversation, because a lot of this is like, okay, can you train to be a bodybuilder and never eat carbs? Can you do an ultra marathon and being carnivore and all this stuff? And it's like, yeah, maybe, but if it's way harder, why not? Like why do you want to do it with zero carbs is the other question. And maybe there's a valid reason, and maybe you want to, and that's fine. But so often we're like trying to it's like we're trying to make it harder for ourselves sometimes. And if you look at the flip side of it, and this concept of no food or no macronutrient is bad or evil, it's how you use it, right?
Yeah.
And so the other side of this coin is that if you are doing ultra endurance training and you're running and hiking and biking all day long, you can probably get away with eating more carbs, and you can probably use these carbs more effectively than somebody who's sitting on their butt all day. So if you're not concerned, if you're healthy, if you're metabolically healthy, if you've experimented with different carb sources and you know ones that make you feel good and don't give you crazy blood sugar crashes and they give you energy, why not experiment with using some of these strategically in your training if it's going to make your performance better and it's easier? Like, it's not easy to do ultra endurance runs or races if you can only eat like meat and fat. Like, I have to carry around like coconut oil and like eat it while I'm on the run. Like, maybe you bring some trail mix, or maybe you bring some things that are higher carb that are just easy to digest, that you can stuff in, that give you energy and make you feel good. Like, I think it's important to have these kind of nuanced conversations, because a lot of people talk about this idea that no, we do not need carbs. That doesn't mean that they're evil and you should never have them. Maybe you just, like you said, experiment and figure out which ones work and when they work. And maybe some training you do it totally fat and protein and you don't need carbs. And then maybe on competition day, when you need that extra burst of energy and your body's going to use it properly. So, just kind of doing that kind of work and experimentation with yourself. Like, I know when I'm doing like, if I was going to do like a powerlifting competition, or if I'm going to train jujitsu, or if I'm going to do a 20K hike, like, I could probably get through it with 0 carbs because I'm fat adapted, but I would eat carbs because I want the energy and I want to eat carbs around crazy intense workouts. So I figure out the ones that work for me that I like, and I'll eat them. So anyway.
Exactly. And I think also just the opposite side of things as well is like having that, lower carb kind of foundation is definitely, I personally think definitely beneficial with endurance training as well, because if you can rely more on fat as fuel during those periods of time when your body is using more fat for fuel versus, if you're not fat adapted, if your body's not used to using fat as fuel, it's going to be a lot harder to kind of do that, right? And you're going to be so reliant on glucose and sugar. So that's where it's kind of like, okay, yes, have that base and build up that base of fat adaptation so your body understands how to use fat as fuel, and then incorporate carbs strategically to, increase that performance, right? So I think that's like what you said, super important. And then it's also, just looking at the spectrums of like the way that I look at carbs is like the leaner you are, the more active you are, probably the more carbs you can quote unquote get away with incorporating. And the more sedentary and more, overweight you are, probably the less carbs that you would implement, right? So
you just look at it like, again, not as like a emotional or judgmental thing, but the more body fat you have, the more fuel you're carrying around with you. Exactly. So you just don't need extra stuff. And if your goal is to get rid of some of that extra fuel on your body, you probably aren't going to achieve that by constantly putting more fuel in, because it's going to use those carbs before it uses the fat and the energy that it has in your, that you already have in your body. So it's just sort of like a practical thing. Like, you've got some extra fuel, use that first before you kind of get the exogenous stuff.
But then also realize too that fat in itself, it doesn't mean that you can just, chug down coconut oil and chug down, lots of butter and stuff like that. It still has, fat is still fuel, right? External fat is still fuel. So we still have to keep that kind of energy balance into, in the grand scheme of things. And that's, I think, where keto has gone wrong for a lot of people, in the sense of they're like, I follow a keto diet, but I'm not losing any weight. And that's one of the things that personally I've seen with a lot of clients, is like not paying attention to that side of things. Anyway, that's kind of another topic. But.
Well, because it's a marketing thing too. It's like, instead of focusing on what you can't eat, which is carbs, it's focusing on what you can eat, which is fat, which translates to people saying, you can eat all the fat you want. You can just eat all the fat. And, to a certain extent, that's good, because it's helping us get over our misguided fears around dietary fat and how eating fat makes you fat and fat is bad for you and it'll clog your arteries. But at the same time, it has taught a generation of people that you can, like you said, just cover everything in cheese and butter and you'll magically lose weight, which doesn't work for most people. So again, nuance, context. All right. last question, last cardio question, which I literally just threw in because I thought it would be funny. What is your favorite and maybe then least favorite forms of cardio?
Am I answering this first?
Yeah, you're answering it.
Okay. So it's like hard for me to say this. So when we're talking about cardio, is it we're talking about like, are we saying like, you know, it doesn't matter what form of cardio, like LISS, HIIT, whatever?
Yeah, all of it. Like,
okay.
What do you, maybe you talk about, like what your favorite, like low intensity, what your favorite high intensity.
So I would say my favorite, and when I say favorite low intensity, it's probably just like walking on an incline treadmill if I'm doing it for fat loss purposes. But if I'm doing it just for like overall general health purposes, it would just be like walking outside and like, you know, a brisk walk, and just, you know, enjoying that, or doing like a bike ride outside. Although my bike got stolen last year, so I haven't done an outside bike ride in a long time, but I did used to do triathlons in college. So that is something I do enjoy, like cycling outside, and hiking. I haven't done a bunch of hikes lately, but hiking I would say too. So that would be my favorite, like low intensity. And then also rowing. Rowing is fun. I have like a love-hate relationship with rowing. It's like, I love it, but it's also like really hard for me.
Very hard.
Yeah. And that's something too, like before I got into CrossFit, I never rowed before. And I was like, oh, like rowing looks pretty easy. Like this is fine. And I'm like, oh my God, this is the hardest thing ever.
Yeah, it sucks. Would you ever compete in triathlons again? Like even just sort of for fun, but like in actual competitions?
I thought about it. I probably would do like a sprint, which is just like the shortest distance. Usually sprints are like a quarter to half mile swim, a like 13 to 50 mile bike, and then a 5K run. Those are always just fun. So I might do that. I did, you know, always have the goal of completing a half Ironman. I don't know if I ever told you this, but in college I got compartment syndrome, exertional compartment syndrome in my lower legs.
I don't think you did. Shit.
Yeah. It was so I was training for a half Ironman my junior year of college, and I overtrained, right? This was when my nutrition really wasn't in check that great. And then also I was just like type A personality, more is better, keep going. And so I ended up developing exertional compartment syndrome, which basically your like the muscles around your legs swell, the fascia doesn't stretch. So you get swelling, it can cause nerve compression. So I actually had to get a bilateral fasciotomy in my lower legs, where they basically cut through, they cut through the fascia to release the pressure. So that I kind of, you know, was always like, oh, I'm going to do a half Ironman to, you know, because I want to. I was training for it and I didn't get to do it. So it was kind of like I got, you know, whatever. So anyway.
Do you have any pictures of that? Do you have any pictures of gory pictures?
I do. I have scars too, like on my legs, but I do have a picture when I first got out of surgery. It's like my calf was literally as big as my thigh. And it's like really gross. But anyway, we don't have to talk about this too much. But sorry, what were you going to say?
Okay, first of all, I want to see the gross pictures. Second of all, I think that maybe, I mean, like in another episode, maybe in the future, we'll see if people give us some feedback about this episode, because that's something that, along with like DOMs and like things that can happen when you push too hard, I think could be an interesting episode to talk about, because I've heard of that before, but I don't think I know anybody who's had it, whatever. Like it would be an interesting story to tell. So like that might be something to.
Yeah, for sure. Because it is something like I was, you know, it was on runs. I thought I was just like cramping or getting, you know, I started to get drop foot where you can't dorsiflex your ankle. And I was like, oh, it's just shin splints. And I just kept running through it until it got to a point where I was like, no, like this isn't right. So yeah. And I did my undergrad athletic training. So like I was literally studying this exact thing, and I wasn't paying attention to it myself. And that's like, you know, they say, what's that saying? Like you're your own, you know, worst critic or enemy or whatever that is. It's like, yeah, I was trying to help a lot of all the athletes I was working with. And I just wasn't paying attention to like what was actually happening with myself. So anyway,
it is a total like human nature thing. Like we talk about this all the time. Like I talked about it mostly with regard to dealings that I've had with other professionals in the fitness industry, where everyone's like, you can't spread yourself too thin. You can't have 20 goals at the same time. You can't do this and that. And you have to sleep before you work. And then these people would turn around and do the exact opposite because everyone thinks that they're the exception. And like, this isn't to harshly judge anyone or say that you were crazy or whatever, but it's like, you were thinking like, I'm learning all this stuff. I'm helping all these other people. This is what you have to do. And you just literally weren't turning it on yourself. And people do it all the time, right? Like I've had moments where I've done it too, where I'm just like, oh, don't work too hard in the gym. You're going to burn yourself out. And then I'm like, I go over and do exactly what, but you learn a lesson, right? And hopefully there are some people out there who are smart enough to learn from other people's lessons instead of having to do it themselves, because no one is the exception to these rules. No one's special. No one's that special.
100%.
Anyway.
Yeah. So those are my favorite. Did I answer that? Yeah.
Yeah.
Rowing and walking.
Yeah, good. I mean, that's for me, like the low intensity stuff. Absolutely. Walking outside, hiking, 100%. I mean, that is just so good for your brain and your body. I like swimming and that again could be high intensity or low intensity, but I was a swimmer growing up, and that's like kind of one of my favorite sports. And I think it's, I find it personally like longer distance swimming, both open water and in a pool. I find it like really meditative, the way that a lot of people find like hiking and walks meditative. And I find it extra so because you are forced into a breathing rhythm. When you're walking or hiking, you can still breathe with your mouth open, and you can, take shallow breaths, and you can not be breathing properly. When you're swimming, you have to breathe in a rhythmic, proper fashion, or else you're not going to get too far. So for me, I haven't really swum like seriously for a long time, but I love it. And it's like always a part of my life. I want to get back to it. But when I was swimming a lot, I found it incredibly meditative for that reason. It's just sort of like your body can go on autopilot, and then you enter this breathing rhythm that is just, when you hit it, and you can do it forever, it's really calming and cool. And it's of course very low stress on your joints and low gravity and all that good stuff. So it's good for people who have some kind of injuries or issues where they don't want to put a lot of strain on their joints. And then as far as HIIT goes, we didn't talk about that. If I'm going to do HIIT, I like to go all out and do the worst possible things. So I love burpees. I love the assault bike. I really like skipping is another good one for high intensity, like double unders, like just go do 500 double unders, like call it a day.
Yeah.
But burpees and assault bike, airdyne, like if you're going to do it, if you're going to say this workout's only going to be 5 minutes long, I'm going to really beast myself. I'm going to make sure it's worth it. I'm going to make sure that it is unpleasant and it hurts and it's effective. And there's no better way to do that than burpees and assault bike. So yeah.
Yeah. I actually, with the assault bike, it's like another love-hate thing with that thing too. But in terms of swimming, so have you ever done a triathlon or considered doing one?
I haven't. I've definitely considered. I mean, I've done a couple, like Alex and I will do like our own triathlons. Like we just make up a route, like, at home, we'll swim 800 meters, run 5K, and then like paddleboard 5K or something. Like we kind of create our own. And I'd be totally interested in doing a sprint level one. I'm not really interested in the longer term stuff. I like watching people do Ironmans. Don't want to do one myself. But the long distance swimming, I actually am kind of interested in. I've watched all these documentaries of people who like swim across the ocean and shit. Like I'm not going that far. But I do like the sort of 1, 2, 3K kind of swims, like open water stuff. Like I think that is actually really fun. So I'd be interested in like exploring some different options.
Yeah. So swimming was like my least favorite part of the 3. So like just thinking about, we could totally do like a relay, which would be so fun. I've always wanted to do a relay where you have, someone swims, someone bikes, and someone runs. And it's like so
what
fun.
Would you do? Bike or run?
I'd probably bike.
Okay. All right. So we got to find a good runner then. Yeah. Okay. All right. That's our next goal for
that could be our goal. Yeah.
Yeah. Until the next time we get together for a podcast, we got to find somebody who's willing to do the shittiest part of the triathlon.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. On that note, this has been Cardio Talks with Ashleigh and Rachel.
Love it. we'll have more, maybe not cardio, but we'll definitely have more talks. And we have the next topic is nutrition. So
that's
stay
a
tuned
big
for that.
bucket of chicken. All right.
Yeah.
All right. See you next time.
All right. Bye.